His signature move was a warning shot. His goal, to grab as much cash as possible without a second thought for the consequences. His terrified victims only got a fleeting glimpse of him before he vanished. The FBI was chasing a ghost, but its agents were determined to put an end to the reign of terror brought by this ruthless gunman. In the late 1980s, a cunning bank robber had the FBI on high alert. Operating alone, he was responsible for the longest string of unsolved bank heists in the agency's history. I'm Jim Carlstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The way these robberies were carried out was nothing short of military precision. Every single move was carefully planned, leaving almost no room for error. Only through an extensive collaboration between local law enforcement and a dedicated team of FBI agents was this criminal mastermind, later nicknamed the Gunslinger, finally tracked down. It all started in San Diego, California, on November 5, 1987. The morning calm inside a bank was shattered by a sudden gunshot. A masked man, heavily armed and ready to kill, issued a chilling threat. Anyone who defied him would be shot without hesitation. He ordered the bank employees to fill his bag with every dollar available, making it clear that any attempt to trigger the alarm or slip in marked bills would have deadly consequences. On the ground, hand where I can see them. Now! There was no time wasted. The man didn't bother with the safe, nor did he linger to count the money. He was in and out within minutes, an efficiency that baffled investigators. By the time the bank employees managed to alert the police, the thief was long gone. Even under the best circumstances, it takes several minutes for law enforcement to arrive on the scene. This criminal knew that, and used every second to his advantage. When investigators arrived, they meticulously examined the scene. Oddly enough, although the suspect wasn't wearing gloves, he had been extremely careful not to touch anything, leaving no fingerprint behind. Since armed robbery is a federal crime, the case was quickly handed over to the FBI. Special Agent Jack Kelly, an expert in bank heists, immediately classified it as a top priority case. This guy wasn't like most bank robbers. Instead of discreetly slipping a note to the teller, he went in aggressively, taking control of the entire room. That kind of approach is extremely rare, occurring in less than 5% of all bank robberies. Even then, it's almost unheard of for a robber to actually fire their weapon. The criminal's brutality made him especially dangerous. Most bank robbers work in pairs or small teams, but this one operated alone, making him even harder to track. His violent approach had a devastating impact on those who encountered him. Victims of such crimes are often deeply traumatized, especially when shots are fired inside the building. Eyewitness accounts of the suspect varied wildly. Some claimed he wore a mask, while others insisted his face was uncovered. Given the contradictions in their statements, investigators turned to surveillance footage in the hopes of identifying him. Unfortunately, the security camera images we had were blurry and grainy. They didn't give us anything useful, Kelly explained. The only information they could glean was that the suspect was a white male, roughly 6 feet tall, with a beard. That wasn't much to go on. Despite the lack of solid leads, Special Agent Kelly suspected that this wasn't the first time the mysterious robber had struck. As he pored over old case files, he found an unsolved bank robbery from a year earlier in San Diego that bore a striking resemblance to this one. The method was identical. The suspect stormed in, fired a warning shot, and made off with the cash. He was meticulous, leaving behind no clues. That level of professionalism told us we were dealing with someone who knew exactly what he was doing. And it was clear he wasn't finished yet. A month after his second heist, the robber struck again. Once more, he chose a San Diego bank, executing the same tactics. A single shot into the ceiling, a demand for cash, and then he was gone. His willingness to fire his weapon made him a deadly threat. If he was willing to shoot into the ceiling without hesitation, there was no doubt in my mind that he wouldn't think twice about shooting a person if they got in his way, Kelly admitted. To help streamline communication within the agency, Kelly assigned the robber a nickname, the Gunslinger. The name quickly gained traction with the media, who plastered it across newspapers and television screens, hoping to generate leads from the public. On December 4th, 1987, the Gunslinger expanded his operations beyond San Diego, targeting a bank in Mission Viejo, about 100 kilometers to the north. I had to comb through every reported bank robbery from the surrounding FBI field offices, Kelly recalled. Agents rushed to the scene, but the aftermath was the same. No clues, no fingerprints, no useful witness descriptions. It felt like we were chasing a ghost. At this point, the robber had stolen $44,000, but for the FBI, the concern wasn't just about the money. They feared it was only a matter of time before he killed someone. We were dealing with someone who would likely become more violent as time went on. The longer he operated without consequences, the bolder and more dangerous he would become. We had to stop him before it was too late, Kelly warned. Then, after nearly a year of silence, he was back. In the span of just 5 weeks, 3 more banks in California were hit. The pattern remained the same. I had no doubt in my mind that he hadn't just been laying low during the past year. He had to have been active elsewhere, robbing banks outside of California, Kelly explained. His hunch led him to investigate similar unsolved cases in other states. That's when he stumbled upon a string of bank robberies in Texas that fit the exact same profile. But one case stood out. In July 1986, a bearded man wearing sunglasses entered a Texas bank. He fired a warning shot, then forced the branch manager to hand over all the cash. As always, he warned employees not to activate the alarm or slip in marked bills. This time, however, something went horribly wrong. Nobody moved. Face down on the floor. Stay there or you're next. Then, without hesitation, he shot the bank manager in the stomach. The moment the shot rang out, chaos erupted inside the bank. The manager collapsed, clutching her stomach as blood pooled beneath her. Employees and customers screamed in terror, frozen in place as the masked man stood over them, his gun still aimed. Lock the doors. Call the police. We've been robbed, one employee shouted as soon as the robber vanished. Within minutes, Texas Rangers, FBI agents, and paramedics arrived at the scene. The bank manager was rushed to the hospital, and miraculously, she survived. But the robbery had left more than just a financial impact. It sent a chilling message. This wasn't just about stealing money anymore. The gunslinger was willing to kill. The FBI had seen plenty of violent criminals before, but this one was different. Witnesses were too shaken to provide a solid description, and once again, no usable fingerprints or physical evidence were found. The security footage was disappointingly grainy. We had nothing. No name, no solid description. He was a ghost, Special Agent Kelly admitted, determined to catch him before he struck again. The FBI's Texas office began collaborating with their counterparts in California. Together, they pieced together a disturbing timeline. The gunslinger had robbed 6 more banks in 1988 alone, alternating between Texas and California. But there was something else. We started noticing a pattern. He always picked banks near highway exits, making for an easy escape route. That told us he wasn't just relying on luck. He was a planner, one investigator noted. That also raised another question. Was he truly working alone? If he had a getaway driver, it would explain how he was able to disappear so quickly. However, none of the eyewitnesses had ever seen an accomplice or a getaway car. He operated so smoothly that it was as if he had rehearsed each heist dozens of times before executing them. Everything about his method suggested he had military or law enforcement training. The way he held his weapon, his tactical movement inside the bank, even how he kept his finger off the trigger unless he intended to fire. It wasn't typical for a civilian, Kelly observed. By now, the gunslinger was becoming infamous. His robberies were being reported nationwide, and his name was regularly splashed across newspapers and television broadcasts. The FBI encouraged this media exposure, hoping it might lead to a break in case. We needed the public to care about this case. If enough people were aware of him, someone might come forward with useful information. An agent explained, and it worked, at least in a small way. A witness from Mission Viejo recalled seeing something strange just after one of the heists. A man climbed into the trunk of a red 4-door sedan before the car sped away. It was a crucial clue. That was the confirmation we needed. He had a partner. The fact that he was hiding in the trunk meant he was going extreme lengths to avoid being spotted, Kelly explained. The FBI immediately began searching for all red four-door vehicles registered in California that matched the witness's description, but that led to another roadblock. There were thousands. Narrowing it down would take months, and we didn't have that kind of time. Despite the setback, they now had a working theory. The gunslinger wasn't just skilled, he was careful. His ability to escape unnoticed meant he had likely been perfecting his technique for years. By 1990, the case had reached a critical point. The robber had hit 27 banks and stolen over $400,000, all without leaving behind a single usable clue. But then he made a bold move. He returned to the same bank he had robbed a year earlier. That was an unusual decision. Going back to a place where he had already been meant one of two things. Either he was getting overconfident or he was running out of options, Kelly noted. The FBI intensified their efforts. Investigators scanned criminal records, looking for ex-cons who had been released around 1986, the year the robbery started. There was a high probability that this guy had been in prison before. Most bank robbers don't just wake up one day and start pulling off heists like this. They work their way up, Kelly explained. But once again, they hit a dead end. None of the known criminals matched the blurry surveillance photos. Then, another realization struck. We started looking at the footage differently. Something about his hair and beard seemed off. They looked too perfect, too artificial. One FBI analyst noted. That's when the investigators had a breakthrough. The gunslinger had been disguising himself. If he was wearing wigs, fake beards, and possibly even using makeup, that would explain why eyewitness descriptions were all over the place. It also meant he was one step ahead of us, Kelly admitted. With this in mind, the team took the surveillance images to costume shops, hoping someone might recognize the disguises. But once again, they came up empty. Either he bought his disguises out of state, or he was just extremely good at covering his tracks, Kelly said. As 1991 rolled around, the FBI estimated that the gunslinger had now stolen close to $500,000 across multiple states. But they still didn't know who he was. It seemed as if he had vanished into thin air. But in San Jose, California, their luck was about to change. During a robbery, the gunslinger made a critical mistake. He left behind a partial handprint. Finally, we had something tangible. The problem? Unlike fingerprints, law enforcement databases didn't store palm prints, Kelly explained. So while they had a piece of evidence, they had no way to match it to anyone. Months passed, and in 1992, the robber expanded his operations yet again, this time targeting banks in Washington state. The moment he hit a bank near Seattle, we knew he was widening his territory. This guy wasn't just a bank robber anymore. He was one of the most methodical criminals in FBI history, said Special Agent Don Glasser, based in Seattle. Investigators were desperate for leads. They examined every robbery for patterns, hoping to predict his next move. They even calculated his spending habits based on the frequency of his heists. We figured out that he needed about $3,000 a week to sustain his lifestyle. Whenever his funds started running low, he'd strike again, Kelly noted. But what truly worried the FBI was the increasing violence in his robberies. The more robberies he pulled off, the more comfortable he got with using his weapon. If he hadn't killed someone yet, we feared it was only a matter of time, Glasser admitted. By mid-1992, the pressure to catch him was immense. Then a breakthrough, but not from surveillance, not from fingerprints, and not from witness statements. Instead, it came from a drawing. One of the gunslinger's heists was caught on camera, without his disguise. For the first time, the FBI had a clear image of his actual face. It was a game changer. We finally had a real chance to identify him. A skilled forensic artist worked to refine the image into a detailed sketch, which was immediately distributed to media outlets. Banks began hanging the wanted poster in their branches, and TV networks broadcasted it nationwide. We knew that if enough people saw this face, eventually, someone would recognize him. And just 2 years later, someone did. On May 11, 1994, an anonymous caller contacted the FBI. "I know the man in that sketch," the voice on the line said. And with that, the case took a dramatic turn. The anonymous call sent a ripple of urgency through the FBI. After years of chasing a ghost, They finally had someone who claimed to know the gunslinger's real identity. But there was a problem. The caller was vague. The guy you're looking for? His name is Johnny Williams, or maybe John Williams. Sometimes he uses Robert Hall. It wasn't much to go on, but the informant provided additional details. He's around 40 years old, drives a red four-door sedan, and works with a partner, his wife. Be careful. He's heavily armed, and if you try to take him in, he won't go down without a fight. He and his wife made a pact. They'd rather die than get caught. For the first time, investigators had a potential name and a confirmed accomplice. But verifying the information wouldn't be easy. John Williams and Robert Hall? Those were incredibly common names. We had to sort through thousands of records, cross-checking every possible lead, an agent recalled. After combing through California's vehicle registration database, investigators found a match, Johnny Madison Williams, Jr. And suddenly, everything clicked. His record was identical to the profile we had been building for years. He was a former Marine from Texas, had a history of theft, and had been in and out of prison for robbery-related offenses, Special Agent Kelly said. But it wasn't just him. His wife, Carol Williams, had also been making suspicious purchases, including a .38 caliber revolver, the same kind used in the bank robberies. They lived in Los Osos, California, a small coastal town near Morro Bay. Their home was an upscale $350,000 property, a strange luxury for a couple with no known legal income. They were living way beyond their means, and we knew exactly how they were affording it, Kelly stated. Now, the challenge was catching them. FBI agents couldn't just storm the house. Los Osos was a quiet, wealthy area where strangers stood out. If Williams saw law enforcement moving in, he'd flee, or worse, start a shootout. Instead, they set up an undercover stakeout, watching the house from a hidden vantage point. Days passed. No sign of Johnny Williams. At first, we thought he had gone into hiding. But then we realized he was probably planning his next heist, Kelly explained. A hunch led them to Seattle. For years, he had been targeting banks in certain patterns. If our theory was right, he was going to strike somewhere in Washington soon, Kelly predicted. They were right. On July 1st, 1994, the Gunslinger robbed a bank in Kirkland, Washington, just 16 kilometers from where FBI agents were already searching for him. As always, he fired a warning shot and demanded cash. But this time, something unexpected happened. One of the bank employees accidentally dropped a paperweight into his bag of stolen money. The sudden weight change made Williams suspicious. He snapped. "What's this? You trying to set me up? You trying to get me killed?" He shouted at the terrified teller. For a moment, it seemed like he might finally break his pattern and shoot someone, but he didn't. Instead, he stormed out and disappeared once again. We had just missed him. But now, we knew for certain he was operating out of Washington, Kelly said. That's when they got their biggest break yet. Johnny Williams used a credit card linked to his alias, Robert Hall, at a hotel in Bellevue, Washington. It was the lead we had been waiting for. We had him. We just had to make sure he didn't slip away again, Special Agent Don Glasser recalled. FBI agents rushed to the hotel. My nerves were on edge. After nearly a decade of chasing this guy, we were finally closing in, Glasser admitted. Outside the hotel, agents immediately spotted Williams' red sedan. They had confirmation he was inside. Now, the trick was taking him down without a violent standoff. They couldn't afford to let him see them coming. If he was armed, and they were sure he was, it could turn deadly fast. We knew we couldn't just storm his hotel room. He had a gun. He had nothing to lose. We had to outthink him, Kelly explained. So they set a trap. Agents coordinated with hotel staff, instructing them to offer Williams a typewriter. He had asked the front desk for a typewriter earlier. We figured we could use that to lure him out of his room, Glasser said. Williams agreed to come downstairs to pick up the typewriter himself. It was a perfect setup. He was about to walk straight into the hands of the FBI. Agents positioned themselves around the lobby and prepared for the takedown. We knew the second he left his room. There was no turning back, Kelly recalled. Then, after 8 years of chasing shadows, the moment finally arrived. Johnny Madison Williams stepped out of the elevator and walked into the lobby. We had spent so long hunting this guy that we knew his face better than our own, Glasser recalled. The moment he stepped into the front office, FBI agents moved in. FBI, hands in the air. Get on the ground. For the first time in years, the gunslinger was caught off guard. There was no fight, no last stand. Williams surrendered immediately. It's over, Johnny, one agent told him as they cuffed him. His wife, Carol Williams, was arrested shortly after when she walked their car, completely unaware of what had just happened. The chase was over, but the investigation was just beginning. Once we had him in custody, we started uncovering everything. He was more meticulous than we ever imagined, Kelly said. Inside the Williams hotel room, they found radio scanners, weapons, disguises, and stacks of stolen cash. But the biggest discovery? A handwritten journal. A detailed record of every single bank he had robbed. He had written down everything, dates, stolen amounts, even notes about security weaknesses. It was like a blueprint of his crimes, one agent recalled. Then came the biggest shock. We thought we were dealing with 48 bank robberies. But when we asked Williams, he corrected us. Kelly said. Williams smirked and said, "If you found me, that means you know my real name. And if you know my name, then you must know about all 56 jobs." The agents were stunned. That's right. He had robbed 56 banks. More than we had even realized, Glasser said. For 12 straight hours, Williams talked. He described how he studied bank security, mapped out police patrol routes, and disguised himself with wigs and fake beards. He took his job seriously. He was meticulous. He was calculating. And for almost a decade, he was untouchable, Kelly admitted. But in the end, the FBI had outplayed him. His reign as a gunslinger was finally over. For the next 12 hours, Williams confessed. Every detail, every heist, every mistake he ever made. It was the longest confession I've ever sat through. I was writing so fast that my hands started cramping, Kelly admitted. Williams revealed how he had spent years studying police tactics, memorizing radio codes, and mapping out his escape routes. I never left a fingerprint, never got caught on a good camera, never stuck around long enough for the cops to show up, Williams bragged. His methods were near flawless. Before every robbery, he would case the bank for weeks, watching the employees, noting security patterns, and even timing police response rates. He wasn't just lucky, he was calculating. That's why he got away with it for so long, Kelly explained. Williams also confirmed a crucial piece of information. His wife, Carol Williams, was his getaway driver. She was my partner. She was with me from the start. She knew everything, Williams admitted. Investigators found that Carol wasn't just an accomplice. She was an active participant. She purchased weapons, handled stolen cash, and even helped Williams perfect his disguises. They weren't just husband and wife. They were partners in crime, one investigator said. With their confessions on record, the case against them was airtight. But there was one final revelation that shocked even the most experienced agents. Williams had a backup plan. If the FBI ever caught up to them, he and Carol had agreed to take their own lives rather than go to prison. They had a suicide pact. That was how far they were willing to go, Kelly revealed. Fortunately, that plan never came to pass. The FBI had stopped them just in time. With Johnny Madison Williams, Jr. and Carol Williams behind bars, the case against them moved forward rapidly. The FBI had everything they needed: a full confession, physical evidence, and eyewitness accounts. There was no doubt about who the gunslinger was or what he had done. The prosecution wasted no time in building their case. This was one of the longest and most calculated crime sprees in modern FBI history. A federal prosecutor stated. Williams was charged with 27 armed bank robberies, though he had admitted to 56 in total. Why only 27? Because many of his earlier crimes had exceeded the statute of limitations. Some of his first robberies were too old to prosecute. Legally, we couldn't charge him for those. But with everything else we had, he was never walking free again, an agent explained. Carol Williams, though not the one holding the gun, was charged as an accomplice in the heists. Prosecutors argued that she was an active participant, driving the getaway car, laundering the money, and helping disguise her husband. Despite the overwhelming evidence, both Williams and his wife pleaded guilty. They knew the case against him was airtight, and a trial would only extend the inevitable. He didn't seem scared. He just accepted it. Like he had always known this day would come, Special Agent Kelly recalled. In a packed courtroom, the judge handed down the sentences. Carol Williams was convicted of aiding and abetting armed robbery and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Then came Johnny Williams' turn. For his violent crime spree spanning nearly a decade, he was sentenced to 92 years behind bars. The gunslinger's reign was over. There was no parole, no chance of early release. He would spend the rest of his life in a prison cell, Kelly confirmed. For the FBI agents who had spent years hunting him, it was a moment of relief. This was a guy who thought he was untouchable. But in the end, he made a mistake. And that mistake cost him everything, Kelly said. Even after his sentencing, Williams never expressed remorse. He never apologized, never showed any regret. To him, it was all just a game that he finally lost, an agent noted. But for his victims, the bank employees and customers who had been traumatized by his gun-wielding heists, the verdict brought closure. The gunslinger was locked away forever. For the FBI agents who had spent nearly a decade chasing him, the case was a career-defining victory. We had been hunting a ghost for years. Finally, we put a face to the name and got him off the streets, Special Agent Kelly reflected. But Williams' arrest didn't erase the damage he had done. Over $1 million had been stolen in total, and while some of it was recovered, most of the money had long since disappeared. He spent it fast. Casinos, luxury items, expensive trips. He burned through it just as quickly as he stole it, an investigator noted. More importantly, his victims never forgot. Hundreds of bank employees and customers had lived through his violent robberies, many suffering lasting trauma from the encounters. For him, it was about the money and the thrill. But for the people inside those banks, it was terror. Many of them never fully recovered, an FBI psychologist explained. Yet, despite all the destruction he caused, the gunslinger never looked back. Even after all the evidence, after all the confessions, he never admitted regret. He saw himself as a professional, a master thief. To him, it was just business, Kelly said. His story became one of the most studied cases in modern FBI history. Law enforcement agencies analyzed his tactics, disguises, and escape methods, using them to train future agents. His case even inspired crime documentaries, books, and law enforcement seminars on bank robber investigation techniques. He wasn't just another criminal. He was one of the most calculated, methodical thieves we had ever seen. And that's why it took so long to catch him, an FBI trainer later said. But in the end, no criminal is untouchable. The gunslinger had spent years outsmarting the system. But one mistake, one break in the case, had led to his downfall. He always thought he was the smartest guy in the room. But when it mattered most, we were smarter, Kelly said. And so, locked away in a federal prison cell, Johnny Madison Williams, Jr., the man who had evaded law enforcement for nearly a decade, spent the rest of his days as just another inmate. His legend faded. His name became nothing more than a cautionary tale, and the era of the gunslinger was over.